Autism sprinter. Think equity. Yeah. It's time to give the power back to the people. We're fighting to make our beliefs equal. Look at the failed policies and how they treat you. We got strength, yeah, we're far from feeble. This is for anyone with autism or a disability. Time to unite, show them how strong our will can be. Move readily, we're promoting equity. A non-profit platform, that's the recipe. Now throw your hands up, we finally got a winner. Think equity with Autism sprinter. Now throw your hands up, we finally got a winner. Think equity with Autism sprinter. It's time to make a change. It's time to stand up for what we believe in. Equality and equity across the board. No matter your race, nation, or creed, disability, or your needs. Yes, it gotta be equal. It gotta be right.
Good evening, guys. Good evening. Good evening. How are you guys doing here in Massachusetts? I don't know about you guys, but it's cold. And winter is definitely coming. And we got to bundle up, you guys. Sad tears. But today we're excited because not too often, and anyone who knows the work that we do at Autism Sprinter is that we're constantly having conversations about equity and disability in color. And I am super honored to have this opportunity to invite Autistics Unmasked to Autism Sprinter to tell us about their work. And guys, let me tell you, there's nothing more powerful than finding out that the founding members of Autistic Unmasked are Black women. Okay? Y'all hear that? Do you guys hear that? Because yes, and also individuals with autism. So I think there's nothing more powerful and meaningful when the conversation comes from people with lived experience, from people who have loved ones, children who have this experience. Because too often as parents and those with lived experience, we are always told what our lives should look like, what services should look like, how to fight for your right. And too often those two things are they just don't align with each other, right? And so, it's amazing to meet individuals that are creating platforms to extend the conversation about equity in real life, to making sure that we're no longer asking to have the same access as everyone else, but we're creating those access for us and our families and our loved ones because we need it like yesterday. So without further ado, I want to invite Opal Nichols, who's the head of education for Autistics Unmasked. And let's talk to her, y'all.
Hi. Nice to be with you today. How are you?
Welcome. Thank you. So, I introduced you, but introduce yourself. Tell us who you are. Where are you from?
Well, like you said, I'm Opal Nichols. I'm the head of education for an organization called Autistics Unmasked. The purpose of our organization is to spread awareness about autism, but most importantly, it's to be a place for the autistic community, including autistic questioning individuals, to find actual information, talk to other autistic people, and then maybe find resources that can help them personally. So that's kind of what we do. And you're correct, our organization is founded by autistics solely and is staffed mostly by people of color. Yeah.
Yeah, listen, it doesn't get any better than this. And that's so exciting because I don't know about you, Opal, but I know as a parent, let's just say that too many conferences and things that I attended, not too often did I find someone with the last name Lopez in the same space. You know what I mean? So it kind of to like see disability conversation expanding.
Exactly. And see your specific experience maybe represented in the autistic discourse and dialogue.
So I know that you introduced yourself and you kind of gave us a little bit about the vision and mission of the work. How did you guys choose the name of your organization?
So, for anybody who doesn't know, the term masking refers to basically the personality and the behaviors that an autistic person develops to blend into society. So, this even goes for people who don't know that they are autistic. They may not understand why they maybe sometimes cannot connect socially with other people, but that masking mechanism comes in as they learn what to do and what not to do. And it is very draining. So the meaning of our organization is that we are done masking. Instead of emulating other behaviors, we're turning inwards and learning more about ourselves, how we like to relate to others, how others will relate to us. And so that's the meaning of Autistics Unmasked.
And I love that because as we were talking before we started the live, is that it does feel like many individuals who have a disability are constantly masking their disability to be normalized for other people. I never understood that. And as a parent, you know, I say this all the time on our lives when we're engaging with other organizations and individuals like you, is it just kind of feels like you're taking the power and you're silencing, you know, the voices of individuals who have the lived experience, who technically should be shaping your policies, you know, the work, the initiatives and narratives. And, you know, is this horrible?
And so that's part of the reason. Yeah, that's part of the reason why discourse about autistic people seems to be so out of pace with the lived experience of many autistic people. Masking is part of the issue, you know, forcing someone to conform to society standards or anyone else's standards for how they should behave. You're not going to get an accurate representation of who that person is. So, of course, we do want to, you know, through community, teach people to unmask and to be inquisitive about who they are and their differences, their likes and their dislikes, what makes them comfortable, what makes them uncomfortable, how they process the world. And really learning all of that is the process of unmasking.
I love that. I love that. So you kind of answered this. Is your organization 100% ran and operated by autistics and people of color? I know that you kind of talked about that already, but what is like the makeup of your organization?
So for the most part, we are almost completely, but definitely majority people of color. Our organization was founded by two autistic sisters of color, Safiya and Kylia. They are both our co-founders. And so me personally on the education team, we're a team of 3 people. All 3 of us are people of color. We have similar backgrounds. So being able to work together about stuff that directly impacts our community is pretty fulfilling. So we want to give other autistic people of color or autistic questioning people of color that same sense of community.
I love that. All right. So I know that I found you guys through another parent here in Massachusetts who tagged me on a post that you guys did on Twitter about the parent course that you guys have for parents like myself to register and learn about how to parent and how to support our loved ones on the autism spectrum.
So Autistic
tell us about that. Tell us about the parent course.
Yeah, so this one is really exciting. So we just launched it this school year, but Autistics Unmasked does have an educational virtual seminar that we do every month. So our next one will take place, I believe, on November 17th. That's going to be a Thursday at 7 p.m. And they typically all are on Thursdays at 7 p.m. But this is for parents of autistic children, loved ones of autistic children, as well as autistic young adults and questioning young adults. So it's a really great seminar. Some of the topics covered is just an overview of autism, what autism is not, traits of the autistic neurotype. We sort of get into disability and how society views disability and how that will affect the life of an autistic individual, as well as, you know, how an autistic person can advocate for them in school and how their parents can advocate for them as well. So that's kind of what each course will focus on each month, and then each session is followed by Q&A so that parents and other attendees can, address anything they saw during the workshop and get, any personal questions answered as well.
I love that, because I think too often we as parents rely on experts, right, to kind of tell us what parenting autism looks like. And it often feels very disconnected of like what happens in your household versus
Right.
like what they're saying in like the DM5, right?
Right.
And so I love that there are spaces, and we have a Facebook group where, parents share their stories, they kind of ask opinions of other parents. And I think that it's time for us to have spaces that we allow individuals with autism to kind of tell us, like, listen, I spent more time in therapies than I spent playing at the park, right? So, and I want to give you a huge shout out to Chris Hall from the Autistics Computers Foundation. And he's a man. He has autism. He started a foundation to give back computers to families and children with autism and adults with autism. And I remember him joining us, and we did a few, lives with him, because we always want to hear from people with autism. And he shared, he told us, he was like, I spent more time at speech therapy and all these therapies while everybody was at the park. I hated it. I didn't like it. And then he also kind of talked about, like, back in the days where inclusion wasn't inclusion, where you was in a sub-separate classroom and you're kind of all the way down the hall or even in the basement, away from everyone, right? Because you had this disability, and it was so easy for your peers to be like, oh, that's what these children don't understand, that's totally hurtful. Oh, he's a sped, she's a sped, and so I love the fact that we're creating these spaces to have that, and also like teach parents about, the importance of understanding and seeing things and catching it fast and getting help fast.
Okay, yeah. So, and what you said is so true, because when a parent is questioning if their child is autistic, or when they know their child is autistic, one of the first things that pops into the mind is, of course, are they going to be all right? What can I do to support my child? And so that's another reason why it's very important to see examples of autistic adults, autistic young adults, school-aged autistic people, so that you can have that sort of firsthand experience talking with someone who has experienced things like this, like what you said about spending more time at therapy than at the park. These are formative childhood experiences. So, Autistics Unmasked as an organization would like to provide a little bit more insight to parents in terms of firsthand experience.
I love that. And so I see another question that we have is, how does Autistics Unmasked connect with the community to making sure that they, you guys share this amazing gem? And how can we kind of make sure that we help and get more parents to register for the parent education courses?
So we do have a website, autisticsunmasked.org, which has the organization's information. You can also tweet directly to us or DM us on Twitter. We hold weekly Twitter spaces on Sundays with various topics. The last one we had was about autism and intimate relationships. We've talked about therapy. We've had lots of, different topics for, autistic people to come and weigh in the space, as well as allies to listen. So you can also reach out to the email that's going across the banner at the bottom. If you're interested in the parent education course, that is my email with the organization. I will send you anything that you want to know, as well as the registration form to sign up. Those classes are free and they're open to anyone who's interested.
Okay, I love it, guys. So again, If you want to email Opal and you want to learn more about the educational work that they do, education@autisticsunmasked.org. And also visit www.autisticsunmasked.org. So what is something more people should learn about autism? Because I think that we get stuck on the DSM-5 and these like narratives that we see on TV and like these false representation of autism. Tell us, what do you think?
So part of that reason we were talking about before, where a lot of the information about the autistic neurotype is not coming from the actual autistic community, there is a lot of misinformation. So there are a couple of myths and misconceptions out there. A lot of people believe that autism is an intellectual disability. It is not. It does not impede or amplify your intellect. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be a super genius either.
Right.
Autistic children have the same intellectual and just in terms of life, the same amount of potential as any other student. So those are two big main things we try to impress upon people in our education course, as well as what autism looks like. Because to be honest, a lot of the information about autistic traits is based on young white boys. So it's not going to capture the full range of the autistic experience. So we try to impress upon people, it's going to look different in different people. You know, the autistic experience is kind of like a pie, like the traits are sliced differently for each person. So no two are going to have the same experience, and it's definitely not going to be, the same for people with different cultural backgrounds, people with different economic statuses. There are a lot of things at play that can affect your experience as an autistic individual. So that is another big part of the course.
And I'm happy that you're saying this, because this is a huge part of the work of why Autism Sprinter kind of how we came to the scene, right? Because like I was saying before, I would go attend these parent educational trainings, advocate training. There wasn't too many families of color. We're sitting in conferences where individuals can actually afford to hire an attorney to fight for, different classroom environments or more services. And I am sitting there like, where am I going to get money to do that?
Right.
And I'm in a school district that, identifies itself as a Title I, community with low income families, a lot of financial stressors. And oftentimes, as you know, being in the educational space, is that they don't give enough resources. They claim to give resources to these underperforming schools or underserved schools, but it doesn't go into special education. And
exactly.
Special education, and let me know your thoughts, is that special education students actually bring more funding into the public school system that oftentimes is not spent on the individual, is actually spent on helping all other students, and also including the individuals who's helping to bring another $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 to the school district. So I'm happy that I'm hearing other organizations name these things, because it's true. For so long before my son was diagnosed with autism and before I even understood this, right? Autism felt like it was like a white disorder, right? Like it was a white thing. And so to me, when my son was diagnosed with autism, I'm like, what is this?
Right.
And just to get the services, it was a lot. And again, I'm just excited to hear other individuals name these things and tackle them to bring equity to the forefront, to say that autism is in color and they are Black and brown individuals who have autism. And, we don't want to be in the back of the picture on your website or, on your newsletter. We want to be like in the front,
Right, in the forefront, because we make up the autistic community as well. And unfortunately, for many different systemic reasons, not all families are going to have the resources even to get themselves or the child diagnosed. First of all, if the diagnostic criteria is based upon, what a young white male might do, then they may not be able, the practitioner may not be picking up on the autistic traits coming from a young Black boy, for example. So part of what Autistic Unmasked tries to do, because we do work with educators as well, we just held a seminar for a school in Massachusetts, but we try to impress upon them a concept called universal design. So this is a way to make learning accessible to everyone. So that way, it doesn't matter if you have the diagnosis or not, you're still able to request the support that you need, and your school is, or your learning provider is still able to give it to you. And that is part of mitigating the whole social stigma of it as well, because you want an open classroom where anybody, regardless diagnosed or not, or what their particular learning challenges are, they can ask for the support that they need, and the instructor actually knows what to do to help them. So we try to teach educators about that as well. But it is really hard. There are so many barriers to getting diagnosed in the first place. Like, a lot of the people in our organization did not get diagnosed until like late teens or adulthood.
Yep.
A lot of them are only self-diagnosed for whatever reason. And that's something that we encourage as well, for all the reasons that I just mentioned. We think that self-diagnosis is just as valid, because nobody knows what your experience is except you. And again, the diagnosis criteria may not even be based on your experiences. So we try to, in our workshops as well as in our Twitter spaces, open the floor to people who are in that questioning space, who have questions about the experience, about, what will work for them in school, in relationships, and things like that.
I love that. I love that. We need to open the conversation. We need to get deeper into the conversation. And you've named a few things that are kind of triggering me, right? So one, if I wasn't a parent who worked in the public school system here, when I had my sons, my sons were twins. They were born preemies. So we had early intervention and all of that. And so if it wasn't that I had that knowledge from working in the school system, that I'm like, hey, so one of my twins is, progressing a little bit more than the other, and our doctor was like, no, don't compare them. People take time. I'm like, we're people of color. We're Black and brown. Time is not of an essence for us. Okay.
Exactly.
The party and we're missing the show. Okay. So I immediately, and I had to kind of like, I wouldn't say fight her, but I had to advocate harder and say, listen, although I understand that I shouldn't compare them and I shouldn't kind of get fixated on this, for me as a parent, would love a referral to a developmental specialist. If it's nothing, it's nothing. It is what it is. But just refer me. And lo and behold, it was, we were diagnosed with autism. And it shouldn't have to have been that way. So if as a parent, I'm coming to an expert, to a provider, it should be a referral. It shouldn't be my child being diagnosed 5 years later. And then also kind of, I'm triggered of the fact that too often Black and brown children are diagnosed, or not diagnosed, is labeled as behavior children who lack, parental discipline, and, something's happening in the household. It's played out too much in our school system, especially in low income Black and brown communities, right? And I can go as far as saying also, when there is a few just Black and brown kids in an all-white school district, right? That they're labeled as a child with a behavior issue, not a child who may benefit from seeing a developmental specialist to see if it's ADHD, if it's autism, if it's a developmental delay. And it's always that part where we're late on giving these access and these services because people already have a narrative about us in our families.
Yes, medical racism plays such a big part in it. Why children of color, why female as opposed to male students or children in general get diagnosed at a lower rate or misdiagnosed as a higher rate when it comes to things like this. This is also something that we touch on in the course, but a lot of the history of autistic research and research organizations comes from this sort of eugenicist history where they're making these determinations to decide who is viable to society and who's not viable, who's the genius autistic and who's the type of, student or person that we don't need. So we want to turn the thinking away from this, away from labeling people good for school, good for society, or trouble for society based on these traits that might just be undiagnosed neurodivergence. So that's a big part of it too. It goes kind of deep. There is a kind of dark history behind it. And so we want to start changing the narrative and do away with things like functioning labels, not, calling people low functioning or high functioning. Because again, autism is different for everyone, and you should always assume competency for each individual.
True. It's so funny because a lot of people see my son and he's verbal and he can do these TikTok dances and whatever, and everyone's like, he doesn't look autistic, and I'm always like, woosah, woosah.
Exactly. What do you mean by that?
Don't go there. And you just smile and you're like, oh really? Oh, yeah, I didn't know autism had a look, but okay, sure.
You're right. There are a lot of preconceived notions that not only affect a practitioner's ability to properly identify an autistic individual, but it also prevents just people in society from correctly identifying neurodivergence, not identifying when their child is neurodivergent. So it's these narratives, and some of them are very negative narratives, and that's part of the reason why people don't want to associate with those labels per se.
And also thinking about the fact that too often Black and brown children are always mislabeled, right? Or misdiagnosed. Let me say misdiagnosed. That I've seen it because I have twins, and I'm speaking from a personal space. And so both of my sons were diagnosed with autism. One of my sons did great, and they're like, oh, he doesn't, have autism no more. He has ADHD. And by the time that my son was like 6, right, they were already pushing medication on my son. And I had to say, wait, let's pause for a minute. One, I'm a woman of color with 2 Black boys, right? Because they have Puerto Rican, half Black. And you're speaking to me and you want me to place my 7-year-old child on medication, who's supposed to have energy, who's supposed to like kind of try to, superhero off the couch, right? Mm-hmm. He's supposed to do that. And that's when it kind of like did something to me to say, you know what? I'm taking my parent power. No one's going to tell me how to raise my children. I, at that point, decided to say, you know what? I could care less about the DSM-5. I can care less about any of these things. We're going to deal with autism how we deal with it here in my house. To this day, my son, who's ADHD, in my personal opinion, removing his autism label was horrible. I personally believe he's still on the spectrum because he is still super sensitive to sound. He has a lot of moments, although, they're both very social and, they're an inclusion and whatever, they both have their little things. And I just don't want to fight anyone anymore. To have to go through, first of all, like feeling like you're filling out like a notebook worth of documentation, right? Mm-hmm. Just to give people a history on why you're there to solicit or get an assessment. And you're kind of, it feels like as a parent, you're on repeat. And people kind of do as they please. And this is not to say that experts are not right and the doctors are not right. It just seems like too often, first of all, autism, ADHD are almost the same if you look at the diagnostic criteria. And I'm sitting here trying to differentiate, like they kind of sound the same to an extent. And it just sucks being in this space, because I know that my son is still on the spectrum. And I feel that with him getting the label of ADHD, it has done, to what I feel has done more harm to him than helpful, because again, he's a Black boy. He had a lot of energy. He doesn't have that same energy now because he's a teenager. So he, body starts calming down. And I just feel that it's just done, a little bit more harm than good.
Okay, you feel like there's a different kind of stigma attached to that? Because a lot of people would agree with you. I think it's a common conception that ADHD and autism will create a similar experience or shared lived experiences between people. So there are a lot of similarities there. But yeah, you should always use what you call your parent power to inquire further if something doesn't feel right to you. That's why I kind of love addressing the parent questions in the little monthly course that we have. Because again, like the parent is just looking to answer the question, will my child be all right? That's all you want to know. Will they have the support that they need? Will others understand them? And for young autistic questioning people, these are questions that they have about themselves too. So being in that space of being able to talk about these experiences, especially when it comes to medical practitioners who don't always get it right, being able to share these experiences that were maybe anxiety inducing or didn't feel quite right or didn't go in the direction that it was supposed to go.
Right.
That can be a healing experience for, the child, the young adult, the parent, and anyone.
Right. And as Kylie says, having these conversations, because we have known the history of a lot of Black and brown families don't want to, go to the doctors because of the stigma. There's the worried of you're going to be given a diagnosis. What's that going to do to your future? Are you going to be placed on medication? There's so much that goes to it. And I think that people don't understand the traumas that we've had from systemic inequities, racial systemic inequities that have hurted Black and brown families to get services, to go to therapies, to seek a psychiatrist and things like that. And I think that, we need more of these conversations for sure. And I love that Kylie said that, because again, I'm still trying to learn the difference between autism and ADHD as a parent. And there's times where I'm like, I want to speak to other people and see what they feel and see if there's something that we need to meet with legislators and doctors and invite them to conversations to say, hey, like, how do you guys come up with these diagnoses? Are you guys still using research-based or assessments that were before I was even born?
Right.
I mean, like, and if so, are you guys working towards like improving that? Because we're in like 2022, so it would make sense that we're working on improving assessments that are a little bit more to the needs of people in the now.
Right. And one of the questions parents and sometimes people in the spaces will have is, is it worth it to pursue the diagnosis? Because, people are so used to having experiences with medical racism. They're used to healthcare costing so much. So, they really want to make sure that they're going to, quote unquote, get something out of it for going through that experience. And what I say is that in terms of educational accommodations, and if you're a little bit older, workplace accommodations, having a diagnosis would definitely make that process a little bit easier because of the conceptions about disability and the lack of funding in most school situations. They are very, what's the right word? They're very specific about what they are going to accommodate. And it is very challenging as someone who works in higher education. I work as an assistive technologist for disability services. Um, they are wanting to accommodate, what's on paper. And it's very hard sometimes, depending on where you live and what your school district is like, to get some support outside of that. Another reason having the diagnosis might be good is because, you now have evidence of neurodivergent behaviors. That way, someone's not coming around and labeling you or penalizing you for being a troublemaker. But then again, there's stigmas attached too. So I think, and people of color are usually used to this, but between the two options, any options, there are going to be some drawbacks in terms of society for both sides.
It's true. And it kind of, if we think about all of this, a lot of research does show that majority of the people that are navigating the school to prison pipeline are special education students. Because of this conversation that we're having, the things that we're pointing out, the barriers, inequities, and it's a lot of people have to name it, that many people struggling and going into the prison system, especially people of color, were denied services, were denied those accommodations and those access because of the systemic barriers. Yeah.
And on top of those who are not able to or don't get diagnosed, even though they think they may be neurodivergent, there's also the subset of people whose disabilities are completely undetected. They don't know about it. They're not familiar with autism. They're not really thinking about themselves in that context. And that could be the case for a lot of children of color, because as you said yourself, you as well as many people think of autism as a, quote unquote, white thing. So they may not even be familiar with how that translates into a Black or brown lived experience. So we try to share with educators ways to make their classroom more accessible for everyone. That way they can even accommodate the people who don't know that they're autistic or maybe can't get that diagnosis. But what's more important than that, because not every teacher is going to be like that, is having the knowledge yourself as a parent and or as the student so that you can advocate for yourself in the classroom. And so we do give lots of examples of accommodations that can be requested, how to learn more about yourself, your learning style, how you react to stimuli, how your senses work, what makes you burnt out, what makes you, melt down, that type of thing. How do you feel in different situations? Because when you know that, you can advocate for yourself ahead of time. And, that's something that you can do with or without a diagnosis. And it's also important to know what to ask for. A lot of students will know that they're struggling, but not know what's available to help them or feel ashamed about it. So yeah, giving people those tools is a very fulfilling part of my work with Autistics Unmasked.
Love it. So I know, so now that we're kind of talking about these barriers and the stigma, what are some of the traits and signs that parents like myself that have not, seen a developmental specialist or may have questions about some things that they're observing in their child. What are some traits and signs that we should be looking at?
So I think three big ones are definitely attention, how the child is reacting to, stimuli, sensory processing, as well as how that child feels about their routine or whether they're cultivating their own routine. So a lot of times autistic individuals experience something called monotropism, which is kind of like tunnel vision, where they're only able to focus on, whatever matter they have their attention on at the time. And it's very hard for them to disengage and re-engage. So that's something to look out for. Time blindness is also a part of that, not really being able to properly register the passage of time. It could have been 5 minutes or it could have been an hour and 30 minutes. Like, I'll believe either according to what the clock says. So that's one. Sensory processing, are certain food textures unpalatable to the child? Like,
Mhm.
typically even young children will know their likes and their dislikes, but
Right.
they should also be able to display, what causes them discomfort. Are they distracted by small noises in the background or flashing lights? Do they cover their ears in public because it's too much
Mhm.
for them?
Yeah.
That kind of thing.
Mhm.
And then the other one is established routine. Most autistic individuals love a good routine. They love to know things ahead of time. So, if you have a child who's, always trying to be 2 steps ahead, always pattern spotting, always trying to establish a pattern, always the first one to correct if something was, spoken incorrectly, or maybe you said something wrong, they're the first one to correct you. That's a sign too. Loving that sense of routine, that established order, and sometimes showing, displaying distress when that routine is disrupted. Maybe they play with a certain toy at a same time every day, and then one day you wash it, and your child is now breaking down because their toy that they play with at 2 p.m. is not there. Their
Right.
routine is disrupted. Like, it's going to take time to um, disengage and re-engage now. So
Right.
those are definitely ones to look out for.
Right.
Every parent knows their child and their little particularities. So some of
Right.
that stuff might sound familiar.
Very. And so I wanna make sure that I pronounce Kylia's name right, because she's like, my name is pronounced. They massacre my name all the time, so I apologize. Everyone. I've always, and I try my best to do it right, because since my name is Jahida, and when I was in school, I always knew when someone was going to call my name, because they're like looking at the paper, and I'm like,
And there's a pause.
right, I'm like Jahida. So I apologize. I wanted to make sure that I said it right. So, okay. I know that these are great things that we're talking about. And I think, again, these are things that we have to keep talking about and share to our community, and telling our community not to be scared. I understand that for so long we've experienced so many things, and some of us don't want to get help because we're afraid someone's going to come take our children away, right? Because of all these systemic issues that we've had that felt like they were specifically designed to oppress us and keep us silenced, to keep us in a space of
Yeah.
no growth. But parents, it's super important that if you're seeing any of these traits, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to email the teacher to say, hey, I have a question. I see, Joe is doing these things at home. Are you guys seeing this in the classroom? And if so, can you guide me and tell me if this is, I'm not going to say normal, because I feel like that word is overly used. And nowadays it's like, what is normal? But asking, or even nowadays with technology, we are able to email our providers, and many community health centers and hospitals have like a dashboard, or an app that you can download, so that you're able to email or message your providers and ask these questions, and being honest about it, and not feeling like you're a bad parent, right? Because there isn't a parent handbook, and there's
Right.
definitely not an autistic handbook, right? And it's okay to ask those questions. And so if I can ask you, Opal, like, what are some questions that we can kind of help some of our viewers that both have, who may self-identify as autistic, or a parent who's, thinking like, hey, this is different. I've had other children, this is a little different. What questions can they ask their provider or their teachers to kind of engage them in a conversation, to see if there are things that need to, go forward?
Okay, so what you said was a really good one. Reaching out to the instructor and being like, hey, I've noticed these things at home. I'm so and so's parent. Is this behavior being displayed in the classroom? If so, I'd like to talk about it. Maybe you guys can get together. The most important thing that I would tell people to frame it as is asking for learning support. Like, I think my child needs learning support. What kind of learning support can you offer my child? Or, if this is something that you've talked about with your child, and I would recommend doing so that you can understand sort of their experience within that classroom. But if there are things bother your child, maybe bring that up in the meeting as well and be like, uh, my child sometimes has difficulty focusing when the lights are bright. Can they maybe be seated in the back of the classroom?
Right.
Things like that. Always maintaining an open line of communication with the teacher, I think. Unfortunately, a lot of teachers are, under supported when it comes to accommodating students, but we try to give them tools as well, so parents and educators can come and ask questions. You can hit that little email at the bottom if you have anything to follow up with me on after this session. But definitely inquire about learning support for your student when it comes to interpersonally, just understanding your child and the dynamic in the family. Organizations like Autistics Unmasked, you can hear firsthand from autistic young adults and teenagers about their, experiences, things that they are going through, things that they have learned over time. You can ask your own questions. Our monthly course is absolutely free. Again, they happen on Thursdays at 7 p.m. And that's a really great way to learn some stuff you maybe didn't know if you're questioning whether you or your child is autistic. And then, of course, there's a Q&A session at the end of every course. So definitely get your questions in there.
I love it. So I know Kylia is in the chat. So if you can drop the link to where our viewers and parents who are commenting, can register. I know that we have some teachers that follow us as well. So we can drop the registration or how to kind of register for the course in this in the chat. Share it so that we can get as many people to take this course, because I think that we need it for sure.
It's somebody else in the chat, Johanna, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but they said that, some teachers don't even know what to do. And that is so true. That's part of, the seminar that we just gave to the teachers in Massachusetts a little while ago. And we actually give parents some examples of specific accommodations to ask for. So, if you know your child, or you can talk about it with your child and sort of tailor things on that list, maybe to request to the teacher, and I would, of course, recommend doing that whether you have an IEP/504 or not. So so if you're interested in that, always reach out to me, or you can learn about it in the monthly class.
Right. And I'm glad Joanna brought that up, because, I'm a very honest and I'm a very direct person, right? Which sometimes gets me in trouble in a lot of stuff. And I've worn both of these hats. I worked in a public school system. I know what it feels like to be in understaffed, overworked, having to pick up and drop off children when, there's issues happening. You're not getting paid for that. You're seeing, teachers get hurt sometimes in the line of the fire, right? And it's true. And I think that these are conversations that we need to all have as a collective unit to say, what is not working and why do we continue to do the same old thing and think magically that everything's going to change, and I'm glad that, she's here and she said that, because it's special education teachers deserve better.
The teachers in general are so burnt out, and we get so into the the mode and the routine of how education is supposed to be, because all 12 years are like that. It's like that in every single state, in every city. It's pretty ingrained that this is how education is, this is how you're supposed to learn. You just have to keep up no matter what, because this is the way to learn. And so it does take a fair amount of creativity and flexibility to be able to accommodate students, because this is what we're taught. Even if we don't necessarily believe it, we're ingrained in this idea that sometimes what really is neurodivergence looks like laziness to us. And so that really goes into people's perception and their approach to even accommodating students. So again, that's why it's important to get ideas in there. In my experience, again, I work at a college as a disability technician. So oftentimes I'm solving a lot of specific classroom and technology issues for disabled students. A lot of things are a lot simpler than people would believe. And when I tell the instructor, oh yeah, the student needs visual support, they can't see, so just do this instead, they're like, oh, that's so easy. I didn't think about that. So sometimes just
we complicate things ourselves. I think like as
yeah.
human beings, we have this tendency of really making things more complicated than they're supposed to be. And it's like in every field, there are great teachers, and there are some teachers that you're like, well, what are you doing here?
Definitely.
Like, you are not in the right field, or either you're burnt out and it's time to move on, right? And but you're right. It's, and I catch myself as a parent sometimes, because I remember going through the advocacy, and I'm feeling like my child needs more, and you're going to give my child more, and then like at one point I'm like, girl, pipe it down. Like, relax. Okay, this is a public school. You went to public school, and what you're looking for might be out of reach for the public school system, right? And so, I had to self-reflect, and and for those who first met me and how autism Sprinter was created, it was because of these struggles and the frustrations and having to pick up pieces where I feel like other people were dropping the pieces. And I'm not even gonna say pieces, because sometimes like where people are dropping the ball, and I'm trying to pick up the ball and have a consistency in throwing this ball so that we can get somewhere, right? Or maybe shoot a hoop and score a point, and so it was a lot, and we just need more conversations like this. And I know
it can be a draining process, especially for people who are going through it for the first time, which is a lot of the cases, and especially for people who are figuring this stuff out about themselves or their loved one a little later in the game, however you want to quantify that. There's a level of anxiety and not knowing what to do, because again, Black and brown people don't have, in many cases, the same resources. And for the longest time, we were precluded from that diagnosis. So people aren't even knowing where to start a lot of the time. Which is why it's so great to be able to support people in that process when they do come to us with questions. Another thing is that a lot of students, they go so long just, trying to keep up with everybody else with no support that they don't even know what to ask for. I remember I had a student come to me after a surgery for an ongoing issue. And she was like, I think I'm going to have to either drop out of this semester or, maybe Zoom into class, because after my surgery, I can't fit in the small desk in the classroom. And I was like, well, why don't we replace your desk with a table and chair? Some students are so used to not being supported that, they sometimes don't ask for help or don't know what to ask. So Autistics Unmasked is definitely there to help support people who are at the beginning stages of that process, or anywhere that you are.
Right. Because the beginning stages is the beginning stages. And as a parent, I can tell you that as years progress, resources become even more limited, because it feels like majority of the resources are giving to like the 18 and under, actually more like 15 and under age group. And then once your child gets into that, into the teenage phase and heading in towards adulthood, guys, we have a lot of work and a lot of advocacy to do, because the resources are very limited. And again, put our children in boxes, not allowing them to grow, and believe that and these are things that frustrate me. And it's funny because when people go shopping with me, I don't know if like I have a radar of like finding people with unique differences, right? And I am the person that will go to a register with someone that I, may I identify or seem like they have autism or a different disability. And I'm the person that's in that line. And you can tell people are looking at me and I'm like, hey, how are you? Like patience. And I'm like, dude, have patience. You guys are not understanding that this individual has a system and how he's bagging your groceries that are
Right.
actually more organized than most people just throw your stuff in the bag, right? So
Right.
this lane because I know that my groceries are going to be bagged appropriately between boxes and size. Like, come on, guys. And it's just, yeah, we just have a lot of more conversations to have. And I know this burning question, and I want to ask this because it's a hot topic. I know that we had a live show not like about a few months ago to discuss ABA, because we have a lot of autistics in our Facebook group who are challenging our parents, which rightfully so. They should say, hey parents, like we need you guys to think out the box. Like this is not the end all be all, right? And what is your organization or why do you understand why so many advocates are against ABA, and what do you hear in your parent seminars about ABA from an autistic lens?
Okay, gotcha. So the stance that Autistics Unmasked takes is that we stand against ABA as a corrective therapy for autistic individuals. Part of that is because we don't think that autistic traits necessarily need to be corrected. I think there are other therapies that could work depending on the child. If anybody has any questions about that. One big element is the effect it has on the child. You're basically telling them that in order to be valid, you have to act a certain way. And more importantly, in order to be valid, you have to conceal certain ways that you are. And so because autistic people, as you said, have these systems, have these, methodical sometimes ways of focusing and directing attention and socializing with people and, experiencing their senses and emotions, like being told to abandon that framework, the framework they were born with, is very, deeply troubling. And you get into that situation, like your friend Chris, where he's saying, I was spending more time in therapy than outside at the park with my friends, all just so that my parents could try to get me to be more like those kids who were allowed to be at the park just because they were born like that. And so that's kind of the stance that we take against it in our spaces. And we did have a space a couple of weeks ago, I believe. It may have been over the summer. Talking about ABA and listening to experiences from autistic individuals. And honestly, the stories from students who had been through that kind of therapy was just that, they felt sad. Some of them felt robbed of their childhood. Some of them felt like they were disappointments or burdens when they weren't doing well. Even if they did do well, it was overwhelming because they were like, oh, I'm going to have to act this way that I'm being taught for the rest of my life to be a part of society. So, and these are mentalities that stick with you as an adult, and people were, getting kind of emotional unpacking. So I understand parents wanting what's best for their child and seeking out any information that they can and, trying what works for your child. But yeah, that's just our stance on applied behavioral analysis. I think another reason it's the first thing people think of is because there's a lot of autistic research organizations like Autism Masks Autism Speaks that sort of fear monger it a little bit. They're like, this therapy, this is the hope for your child to be quote unquote normal. If you go through this therapy, then, they will have a better life. But according to some of the people in our spaces, they didn't find that to be true of their experiences.
Right.
I also think it's kind of, I don't think it's kind to come to parents who are just trying to do what's best for their kids with this sort of angle.
Yeah, it's true. And the main question is, why are you putting your child in therapy specifically because they are autistic? If they're having trouble communicating, offer sign language, AAC, picture books. Physical and occupational therapy can help with things like addressing tying shoes and laces. That is, Kylia, that is so true. So my experience is my son was not a happy person during his ABA sessions. And I also can be truthful by saying that just from the course of the diagnosis to him being in kindergarten, I can't even tell you how many ABA providers we had, because it was like a turnaround. It was like a huge turnaround. He was not a happy person in that space. And so we haven't had ABA since he was in first grade. It was removed, one, because the district does not offer ABA in inclusion settings. So again, it's like, if we're thinking about the box, right? So in order for my child to get these services, you have to box him in to this narrative versus allowing him to grow and going to different spaces and challenge his social skills in a real, like in a different environment where, children can engage him in developing friendships, right? And
that's a big thing too, boxing the person in. And this can happen with a diagnosis, because if you're saying this, basically what a diagnosis does on an IEP/504 is this. It says this person has the following limitations. This person needs the following support. This is the area that they are functioning in. It does not allow room for multiple forms of engagement, for multiple levels of support, for the student to experiment and find out what works for them. It's just basically quantifying them based on their ability, when really, you shouldn't be using the, what you think a person can't do to quantify how much you're going to help them. The class should be more accessible for all.
And again, why do we have to place the limitations for them? It's been an interesting journey. And, I've always been and we're more of a parent-led organization. And, I always tell parents, especially parents that are referred to us, is like, listen, we're going to give you very raw and uncut conversations. We're not following the directives of experts. We're not following DM5s. We follow parent heart and the individual who should be leading the way, the individual who has the lived experience, because I know that there's also this huge debate from families who have nonverbal children. And this could be like a whole seminar that maybe we can collaborate and talk about, is that there is that conversation about nonverbal versus verbal autistics and ABA in that component, and I know that there's parents in our space who are saying, well, hey, we disagree because my child's nonverbal and ABA has helped my child, with these things. And I've learned some tools that I've been able to adapt at home. So there is like another conversation around ABA and, within the autistic community.
It definitely, ABA, I think, as it's designed to do, it definitely helps the student or the child receiving the services to develop skills. That's what it's designed to do. Teach speaking skills. Teach organization skills, play skills, if you will. But it's kind of like, at what cost? You're basically, and as Kylia is saying, ABA is abuse. You're some of the I don't want to say tactics, but some of the things that they do in ABA are very demoralizing. And that was the general theme of that space we had. So I think the experience that you and your son had with ABA is a common experience, at least from the autistic perspective, because it's almost like trying to train it out of us, which, is unkind. This is just who we are. It's not lesser than you. I just think about things differently than, you might.
Right.
Yeah, we should learn. We should come to, meet in the middle, I
Right.
shouldn't have to come all the way to you.
Right. And that's how
you
I
take me
felt.
seriously.
My son was very anxious. And like I was telling you that, and I say this a lot in a lot of the lives, is that he had a thing where he was always, doing this. And I as his mom, I knew that something's going on up here. That he's on overdrive and he's trying to figure out a way to calm down. And I remember some of his therapies in ABA were like, how to stop that in order for him to kind of verbalize what he was internalizing. But it was heartbreaking when my baby was crying and like, he's like, this is, and at that time he wasn't talking. So how was he going to verbalize? You know what I mean? He wasn't trying to tell you why he was doing that. So, our experience, we're not a hate of ABA. We're not a love of ABA. We're one of those groups of people that are like, whatever floats your boat, but make sure that you are well informed, right? And have different options, because it doesn't have to be, and I think that we can't keep thinking the ABA is the end all be all, because it's not, guys. Like literally a simple trip to the park can be therapy. Therefore, you're not stressed. The kids are not stressed. And you guys are just having a moment. You know what I mean? And I found it easy for me to take it to the parks, take it outside. And when people would say, oh, that kid is talking funny. And I'm like, he's on the spectrum. He's autistic. And they're like, what's that? I'm like, oh, sure, I can teach you. And I'll teach your mom and dad too. You know what I mean? So, it's having the real life experiences instead of, again, putting people in a box and feeling like everything has to be like, it's like you're conforming. Like you want people to conform to things that you think it's right, but we're not thinking of different ways to add to that. And you know what I mean? I don't know. We've been a real life experience type of family, signed him up for basketball. It was, did he shoot the ball on the opposite side of the court in a game? Yeah, he did. And we're in the, in the seating area laughing, and people are like serious, and we're just laughing. We're like, that's juju. Okay. He wanted to play basketball, and we tried it. And guess what? And then he did it once, twice, and then once he understood it, he got the game, right?
Because you're letting him be who he is and learn how he learns. So that's the main thing about ABA. I was just about to say this, and it just came across the bottom, but it was developed by the same person who developed conversion therapy. So the whole idea of it is to take your child and change them. And so, of course, no matter what methods are being used, that's going to be a traumatic process, especially for children who maybe are, situationally mute or just nonverbal, period. They cannot, express themselves in the capacity that maybe they're being asked to in the therapy setting. So, there's so many elements that go into it that could, be harmful for the child. And you saw firsthand about that. So definitely, allowing the child to have a lived experience, being who they are and learning how they learn, will be more fulfilling than trying to coerce or train certain behaviors out of them.
Yeah, it's true. You're right. And that's why, I always tell people the real world is our therapy. we're going to try it. If it works, it works. If it don't, it don't. And that's okay. But we're not going to, I shouldn't have to feel like the only way that my child will be seen as an equal, signing him up to only play sports with other, children with autism, right? Or autistics. He should be able to play sports with everyone. It shouldn't, again, and we're always kind of screaming inclusion, but we're really more like secluding. And we're not creating spaces for disabilities to be incorporated.
And I think there's two major ways of doing this. First is by having the conversation be inclusive of people of all races, backgrounds, economic, whether you're an autistic individual or not, leveling that conversation, as well as in the educational capacity. Since we are talking about children right now, we really try to impress upon educators the principles of universal design. Make the class accessible for everyone, allow everyone to select their own accommodation options. Not only will you be able to cover the kids who can't get diagnosed or don't even know that they're autistic, but now you're also creating an environment where people are not looking at each other weird or looking down on each other for having accommodations. So it's like killing two birds with one stone. And again, teachers do not always have the resources or the funding or the time to, do this type of stuff or to focus on this type of stuff. And accessibility does take a lot of creativity. So we do offer, suggestions of common accommodations that don't, cost money, that can be done during class and that won't disrupt other students' experience. So it's just part of the whole process and the mission of, accessibility for everyone.
Right. And it's funny that we talk about this because when I used to work for Boston Public Schools, as an assistant dean of discipline at a middle school, we had a classroom on our first floor where children who were in wheelchairs, right? So the physical disability. And so what I used to do was like, hey, these children get in trouble. I'm not sending kids home because the parents got to take time off of work. They're not having that money. So what I would do is I would take those individuals and I'm like, hey, you know what? We're going to help this teacher. Because this teacher's here by herself. The para comes and goes. Like sometimes she's there by herself. So we're going to come into this classroom and we're going to support. And it turned out to be beautiful because these individuals in this classroom would eat lunch with all the other students, but they were all the way in the back, or in the front, actually in the front to easy access to get out. And they were kind of just there, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And so when we started doing that as a collective team, the students now started engaging because now I'm not sending you home because you did something that maybe you should never did. And we're not going to penalize your parents for this. So you're going to stay in school today and you're going to help us somehow. And it just turned into something so beautiful where the children, when the individuals, students with the wheelchairs will be in the hallways, other students actually knew individuals' names. Beautiful, something that you don't typically see. Students were more prone to want to help. Right. So the teacher, if the teacher needed help, we knew some students were already in the classroom who kind of knew the routine and assisted. And it's just, again, and it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't have to be complicated. Right. So I could have sent a child home. Mom and dad got to take time off of work, probably not get paid. We don't know if they have sick time, personal time left. Right. We don't know what type of job they have, but we're keeping the student in the classroom. And now we're teaching the student to understand other individuals, you know what I mean? And understanding disability from a different lens, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So it's just, again, getting creative.
Yeah.
In the norm of what we think a society should look like.
And you're right. That can help bridge the gap of students understanding each other, being familiar with each other in that capacity. Maybe two students both have, support needs that have them at the back of the class or at the front of the class so they can see the board better. Now you have these two students sitting together, they both feel comfortable with, verbally saying that they needed these learning supports and receiving them. And so you have this environment of everybody being able to say, this is the best way I learn, or maybe I need to sit over here, or I need a little extra time when we do in-class assignments. So yeah, and that one is so important. I even try to impress upon the students that I work with, at the college about this, but, never be afraid to advocate for yourself.
And it's okay. And if people don't like it, so what? I mean, everything is not cookies and cream. You know what I mean? Like, you should be able to challenge, we should be able to challenge the norm, right? Because again, it's not being defiant, it's not being disrespectful, again, and these are other elements of just being in the disability space, that when you are a parent or you're someone with a disability, that you feel like you can't even say anything because it kind of feels like we're the low bottom of the toll of priorities, right? And we've seen this during COVID, right? Because remember, when COVID hit, schools are shut down. Many of our babies never learned through the virtual world, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of the first issued letters that came out of the Secretary of Education from the White House was school districts can don't have to offer services. And you're like, pause. What do you mean? Right. This is a violation of FAPE and IDA. Oh, you guys are going to have to figure this out, because parents went on Twitter and you're like, honey, that's not going to happen. Right. And but that goes to show you, and this is in 2020, just 2 years ago, that was a response from the White House, who said that we don't have to honor supports for individuals with disabilities. And so that it just says to you that 2 years later, we know that learning loss impacted a lot of individuals, especially those with IEPs and 504s, who are going to be playing catch up. And it's just, we're in a space that we need to advocate and be honest and say what needs to be said, and be the elephant in the room, you know what I mean, and being okay with it. We can no longer kind of do what has been happening for years and then wonder why there's no progress.
And a lot of people, unfortunately, we are doing our best to advocate in every single space that we can get access to, but unfortunately a lot of people will not know how to deal with disability or how to deal with neurodivergence. So that's why Autistics Unmasked tries to give individuals and parents the tools needed to know, what can I request? What types of accommodations are there? What do I do if my child does not have a diagnosis or can't get a diagnosis? Those types of questions, because unfortunately, a lot of times, and this is particularly the case for families of color, when you're trying to go get those resources, they're not there. And so you need somewhere to be able to look to get the information so that you can, live the life you want to live and support your children, So
I have a question, and I'll end with this, because it reminds me to ask this question of other organizations of color. Here in Massachusetts, I'm from what you will call the inner city, the hood, whatever, right? And majority of the nonprofits and organizations that service individuals with disabilities are not nowhere near my community. We have to drive past, and for those that don't have a car, buses, we're going to other cities and towns to gain access to just simple workshops on IEPs, workshops on services and advocacy and things like that. Is that the same for where you're located? And could this have been why it we're here today with Autistics Unmasked?
Yeah, so I live in southeastern Virginia, and it is kind of the same here. We do have, because it's a military area, so there are people from, all over the country and the world here. So there are, essential services nearby, but what there is not a lot of anywhere is competent practitioners who are knowledgeable about autism and who can diagnose autistic adults, who are affordable, who take your insurance, and who offer virtual appointments.
And don't have a waiting list of 2 years.
Right, are available as well. So finding all of that in one package for a practitioner, it is very difficult here. And again, I think this is, the main reason why so many people are self-diagnosed or not able to get an actual clinical diagnosis, which is, again, why we encourage self-diagnosis. Nobody knows you like you do, but what you do need is the information to know if, to figure out if your thoughts about yourself matches up with the autistic experience. So we try to be the ones to provide that information, answer questions for questioning individuals, because that is a big barrier. It's probably even a barrier in some major cities, just because, the information that's out there and in the DSM-5 about autistic people does not apply to every kind of person who can be autistic. And that's just the case right now. So what we need to do is, put individuals to the forefront of the conversation, to the front of the discourse, who have these experiences. Black people, low-income people, women, people from all different backgrounds that are maybe underrepresented when it comes to, who's typically the face of neurodivergence.
And let's add that girls are diagnosed at a higher rate, or was it at a lower rate than boys?
For autism, girls are diagnosed at a lower rate. They are diagnosed at a higher rate for things like personality disorders, which can sometimes be misdiagnoses of autism, because when you're looking at, autistic traits like attention to detail, love of routine, correcting people, vocal stems, interrupting, things like that, they look at a boy and they're like, okay, that's neurodivergence. They look at a girl and they're like, she seems a bit bossy. She might have a personality disorder. So again, it's really up to the practitioner that you get, and it shouldn't be that way. But Autistics Unmasked understands the reality of what autistic people and parents have to deal with. So we just try to take it a step at a time.
Right. So I'm just so thankful and honored to share this space with you. And again, anybody who knows me, I'm like, I'm excited when I speak to organizations around autism that are of color. We need more. We need to have these conversations at a larger scale. We need to be building and mobilizing on a national level to discuss autism in color, because autism exists in our communities. And also, as communities of colors, we should not be scared to talk about this at a dinner table. And we don't have to hide our children with a disability at home because we don't want our next door neighbor to know. Or, working with the churches to start incorporating disability friendly spaces in our churches, so that families like mine who are extremely stressed out, who can benefit from the word of the Lord, can go to the church and be able to stay in church the whole time, versus having to leave because the music or the sound or the smell there is in a back room. We have a lot to talk about, Opal.
Yeah, I know. I was just about to say that stigma of neurodivergence and even disability in general in communities and families of color is, that's really poignant too. A lot of times not only does the parent not want to get their child diagnosed because, oh, that's a white thing, or I don't want anybody looking at my child like that. I know how, society treats disabled people, or they don't want abuela to know that, their child is neurodivergent or disabled. So, that is a part for parents to overcome, but we hope to help by, hosting these spaces and these little seminars. So even people, there are some who come in and they don't say anything, no questions. They're just listening, to kind of hear what other people are going through, some of the questions that they have. So even if you want to drop by, but you don't really have anything to say, or you don't really know how it applies to you and you just want to learn, that's perfectly fine too.
Right. So you can close us out. Tell us where we can find you again. And I know that you said it, again, tell us your website. You can, the upcoming dates for the parent educational courses.
Okay, so our URL online is autisticsunmasked.org. So it's that last part of the email that's running across the banner. The email address, education@autisticsunmasked.org, is how you can get in contact with us. If you're interested in the education course or have any questions about what we do here, I'll be responding to you through that email. We're also available on Twitter, where you can tweet at us or DM us. The Twitter handle is Autistics Unmasked, and we also have our Twitter spaces there. They happen every week on Sunday evenings. Our next parent education course is going to be November 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, if you reach out to us or follow any of the links on our social media, you'll be able to register for the course. It is free and it is virtual. So we encourage everybody who's interested to attend.
All right. Opal, thank you. Again, I'm humbly honored to be in this space and share space with you. And I will definitely be following you guys. Let's definitely chat about maybe, doing a follow-up forum or creating a summit together. I've been really wanting to put a summit together with different organizations led by women of color or men of color around this topic to, create a summit on disability and color and what does that look like for us. So I'll definitely follow up with you so that we can kind of collaborate and bring something to, forward. But again, I'm humbly honored to be here and share this space and have this amazing dialogue. And I'll see you in November. I'm registered for that course and I'm looking forward to it.
Yes, you are. Thank you so much for having me. The conversation was so great. I would love to do this again. You definitely have my contact information so that we can put something together. Thank you so much, Yahaira.
No problem. Thank you. Have a good night.
You as well.
Bye. All right, guys. Good night. We'll see you next time.
Autism sprinter. Think equity. Yeah. It's time to give the power back to the people. We're fighting to make our beliefs equal. Look at the failed policies and how they treat you. We got strength, yeah, we're far from feeble. This is for anyone with autism or a disability. Time to unite, show them how strong our will can be. Move readily, we're promoting equity. A non-profit platform, that's the recipe. Now throw your hands up, we finally got a winner. Think equity with Autism Sprinter. Now throw your hands up, we finally got a winner. Think equity with Autism Sprinter. It's time to make a change. It's time to stand up for what we believe in. Equality and equity across the board. No matter your race, nation, or creed, disability, or your needs. Yes, it gotta be equal. It gotta be right.